The slot in the steel door opened at 11:46 p.m. A corrections officer pushed a paper cup of water through it and said, "Your attorney call was approved." I stood from the concrete bunk. Now? 5 minutes. I was arrested 7 hours ago. I don't control the phones. No. Your warden does. His expression changed just enough to tell me I had guessed correctly. 20 minutes earlier, Captain Jessamure had handed me the classification form that placed me in administrative segregation at Holloway County Detention Center. At the bottom, beneath a paragraph claiming I faced an unusual risk from inmates because of my work inside the facility, was the approval signature. Warden Corinne Rourke. My wife. She had not merely watched me get arrested. She had personally signed the order putting me alone in a cell. I held out my wrists. The officer opened the door and cuffed me before taking me down the corridor. Administrative segregation was not supposed to be punishment. That was the language everyone kept using. Protective placement. High-profile detainee. Security concern. 23 hours a day behind a steel door was still 23 hours a day behind a steel door, whatever phrase appeared on the form. At the attorney phone, the officer stayed far enough away to give me privacy but close enough to see me. I dialed Avery Linwood. She answered immediately. "Miles? I'm in segregation." "What?" Corinne signed it. Avery was silent for half a second. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Have they questioned you since booking?" "No." "Good. Do not answer anything without me. I need you to call Inspector Lena Ortiz." Another pause. "The State Detention Oversight Office?" "Yes." "What exactly are you authorizing me to give her?" "The Blue Frame Access Report from this afternoon. The original automated alert email. My photographs from the loading dock. And the maintenance ticket showing who disabled door L17's audit notification." Avery lowered her voice. "You understand that takes this completely outside the county. That's why I'm calling. Anything else?" "Yes. Tell Ortiz to preserve every access control event from L17, the staff garage, the restricted loading corridor, and segregation intake from noon today forward. Tell her not to request it through Corinne." The officer tapped his watch. 1 minute. Avery said, "Miles, what happened after they took your phone?" "They found contraband in my service case." "I know. Detective Beckett sent me the arrest affidavit. It wasn't there when I entered the building." "Can you prove that?" "Blueframe's truck camera may show the case when I unloaded it. But the more important question is who opened the secure maintenance room after I left my tools there." "I'll get Ortiz." The officer stepped closer. "I had seconds." "Avery." "Yes?" "If they say this is about me stealing phones into the jail, make sure Ortiz sees the first alert before anything else." "What first alert?" "The one generated at 1:18. "I see it." "What does it say?" She read it. "Administrative override. Audit suppression enabled. User, S. Cade." "Good." The call ended. Silas Cade was Holloway County Detention Center's deputy warden. He was also the man sleeping with my wife. 6 hours earlier, I had been trying to prove he was moving contraband through a door my company installed. I had not expected to become the inmate on the other side of it. Blue Frame Security Systems maintained access control at 3 county facilities, including Holloway. We did not guard inmates. We maintained the electronic hardware that decided which staff badges opened which secure doors and when. Most days, my work involved firmware updates, failed card readers, damaged locks, and supervisors who forgot their pins. That afternoon, one of our monitoring servers flagged something different. Door L17 had stopped sending audit notifications. The door separated the staff loading corridor from a restricted service area running behind the jail laundry and kitchen. It was not supposed to open silently. Every badge event should have created a timestamp, user identity, and alert if the door stayed unsecured longer than 90 seconds. At 1:18 p.m., somebody with administrative credentials turned off one part of that monitoring. The account belonged to Silas Cade. I called Corinne first. That was my mistake. Not because she was the warden. Because she was my wife. Silas disabled audit notifications on L17, I told her. She was in her office above central control. Maintenance? No ticket. Maybe he was testing something. He doesn't have a reason to test access control rules. He oversees security. He oversees officers. He doesn't maintain Blue Frame equipment. Corinne looked tired. At 41, she had spent most of her career inside correctional institutions and had been warden at Holloway for 3 years. She knew exactly what an unexplained monitoring override meant. "Turn the alerts back on," she said. "I already did." "Then send me the log." "I'm going downstairs first." Her expression hardened. "For what?" "To look at L-17. Miles, if it's fixed, send security the report and let them handle it. That is not how you treated unexplained door overrides 6 months ago. 6 months ago we had an inmate escape attempt. And now? Now we have one disabled alert. From anyone else, caution would have sounded reasonable. From Corinne, it sounded selective. Especially because Silas's name was attached to it. I had learned about their affair 11 days earlier. No dramatic confrontation. No hotel receipt. Silas sent her a message while her phone was charging beside me in our kitchen. I can't keep pretending yesterday meant nothing. The preview stayed on screen long enough for me to read it. Corinne admitted they had slept together twice. The first time after a corrections conference in Charlotte. The second in his office after a late shift. She said it was over. I moved into our guest room that night. We had not yet decided what came next. That history did not prove Silas was smuggling anything. It did explain why I refused to let Corinne privately decide that his unusual system activity was harmless. I went downstairs. L-17 looked normal. Badge reader green. Electric strike functioning. No damage. Then I checked the service corridor. A rolling laundry cart sat 20 feet from the door. Nothing unusual there either. I was about to leave when I noticed one of Blueframe's tamper seals on a low-voltage cabinet had been cut. Inside that cabinet were network switches and door controllers. There was no legitimate reason for detention staff to open it without us. I photographed the seal. Then I saw a black nylon pouch behind the lower cable tray. I did not touch it. I called Corinne. "Come to L-17. Bring internal investigations." "What did you find?" "A package inside our access cabinet." "What kind?" "I haven't opened it." She arrived with Silas. "Not an investigator." Silas looked at the cabinet and immediately said, "That isn't ours." I stared at him. "You haven't seen inside it." "I mean the bag. You recognize it?" "No." Corinne said, "Miles, step away." I did. She called Captain Muir and 2 investigators. They photographed the pouch before removing it. Inside were 6 smartphones, charging cables, tobacco, dozens of Suboxone strips, and small packets containing a powder that later field-tested positive for methamphetamine. Nobody in the corridor spoke for several seconds. Contraband phones inside a jail were serious enough. Drugs made it criminal immediately. Silas recovered first. Who had access to this cabinet? Blueframe technicians. And? Anybody who cut the seal. He looked at Corinne. My point is Miles's people have unsupervised access to these spaces. My people log every service visit. Silas said, "Your company also controls the logs." That was when I understood where he wanted the conversation to go. I looked at Corinne. "You know our field technicians cannot suppress a jail administrator's credential event under Silas's account. He could say the credentials were compromised," she said. Silas turned toward her. "I didn't authorize that override." "Then somebody used your account." I said, "We'll know more when we pull controller history." Silas answered immediately. "No outside extraction until internal investigations takes custody. Blueframe has contractual access to our own controller diagnostics. This is now evidence." That part was defensible. I stepped back. "Fine. Preserve the controller and the server logs. Nobody changes anything." Corinne said, "Agreed." For approximately 40 minutes, I believed the system would do exactly that. Then Detective Ronan Beckett arrived from the sheriff's office. He asked me to accompany him to the maintenance room where I had left my service case. The case was open. I knew before he said anything. We found additional items inside. 3 prepaid phones. 2 bundles of Suboxone. 1 packet of methamphetamine. I stared at the case. That was planted. Beckett did not react. Who had access to it? I left it locked. Who has the key? Me. Combination? No key. Numeric latch. Anyone know the code? Not intentionally. He photographed it. Silas stood in the doorway behind him. I said, "Check the camera outside this room." Silas answered, that camera has been down since yesterday. I looked at him. Convenient. Corinne said my name sharply. I turned to her. 17 notifications disabled under his account. Camera outside the room down. Contraband appears in the exact service case belonging to the person who found the first stash. Beckett said, Mr. Rourke, stop. I want the access log for this room preserved. It will be. And my truck camera. That too. Silas folded his arms. You seem very prepared. I install security systems for a living. Beckett asked me for my phone. I refused until Avery was contacted. That did not prevent my arrest. The affidavit alleged introduction of contraband into a detention facility and possession with intent to distribute prohibited substances inside a secure institution. The evidence was circumstantial but physical. The contraband was in my case. I had legitimate access to the secure corridor. My company maintained the cabinet where the first stash was found. And Corinne did something I will remember longer than the handcuffs. She told Beckett, I cannot interfere. Treat him exactly as you would any other suspect. It sounded principled. Then Silas leaned toward her and whispered something I could not hear. 10 minutes later, Beckett put me in cuffs. I was booked into the detention center my wife ran. Captain Muir looked horrified when intake received my paperwork. This is a conflict nightmare. I noticed. We may need to transfer you. Please do. She called upstairs. 20 minutes later she returned with the segregation form. Warden Rourke wants you housed here temporarily. Why? Protective concerns. Transfer me to another county. That request was denied pending first appearance. By whom? Her silence answered before she showed me the signature. Corinne. My wife had insisted that police treat me like any other suspect. Then, once I was inside her jail, she made sure I was placed where I could not speak to another inmate, pass a note, see normal movement, or reach a telephone without permission. Now, standing in the segregation corridor after my 5-minute legal call, I understood why. She had not isolated me because I was dangerous. She had isolated the one person who knew Silas's access account appeared in the system before the contraband was discovered. The officer opened my cell. I stepped inside. Before the door closed, he said quietly, You really think the deputy warden put that stuff in your case? I think the logs will answer that. The steel door shut. For the first time all night, I smiled. Because the most important log was no longer inside Holloway County Detention Center. Avery had it. And now the state inspector did too. At 2:17 a.m., the lights outside my cell came on. Not the overhead light inside. That never really went dark. The corridor lights. Boots moved toward my door, more than one pair. I sat up on the bunk. Captain Muir appeared first. Behind her stood two people I had never seen inside Holloway. One wore a navy jacket with state detention oversight printed across the back. The other carried a hard evidence case. Muir looked through the window. Miles, stand at the back wall. I did. The door opened. The woman in the navy jacket entered. Mr. Rourke, I'm Inspector Lena Ortiz. Avery had made the call. Ortiz looked around the cell, then at the camera mounted above the door. How long have you been in segregation? About 3 hours. Have you spoken with anyone besides your attorney? Captain Muir. 2 officers. Any questioning? No. Any threats? No. She nodded. I'm going to ask that you be moved out of this facility tonight. Muir exhaled through her nose. That told me she had been hoping for the same thing. Why? I asked. Because the warden is your spouse, the deputy warden is implicated in the underlying contraband discovery, and both are in the command structure responsible for your housing. That was obvious before they locked me in here. Ortiz did not defend it. Yes. Did Corinne object? Her expression stayed neutral. She is not making the decision. That was the first thing anyone had said all night that made the cell feel smaller in a good way. Ortiz stepped back into the corridor. A second investigator photographed my segregation paperwork, including Corinne's signature. Then he photographed the housing log. Muir said, Warden Rourke classified him protective administrative segregation because inmates may know he services the security system. Ortiz looked at her. Was a transfer option considered? Yes. And denied? Yes. By the warden? Muir nodded. Ortiz wrote something down. Was Mr. Rourke permitted normal attorney access? After authorization. What time did he request it? Muir checked the log. 8:54. What time was the call approved? 11:39. Ortiz looked at me. 3 hours. Not because every jail phone was occupied. Because someone had delayed it. Who had to authorize? Muir said, segregation legal calls route through command review after hours. Who was command tonight? Deputy Warden Cade until 11. Then Warden Rourke personally took over. Ortiz stopped writing. When? 10:52. Silas had controlled the first 2 hours after my arrest. Corinne had controlled the next. I asked, is my wife still in the building? Yes, Ortiz said. Does she know you're transferring me? She does now. I almost asked how she reacted. It did not matter. At 2:46, Holloway officers walked me through intake again, uncuffed long enough to change from county-issued clothes into the same jeans and shirt I had been arrested in. My service case remained evidence. My phone remained evidence. My wallet and keys were returned. Then Ortiz's team drove me to Redmont County Jail 30 miles away. I was placed in a normal single intake cell there, not segregation. At 8:30 that morning, Avery stood beside me at a video first appearance hearing. The prosecutor requested secured bond. Not an outrageous amount. Enough to keep the case serious. She argued that contraband had been found inside my locked service case in a secure detention facility and that the investigation was continuing. Avery responded with what we already had. The first contraband stash had been discovered only because I reported a system anomaly. Silas Cade's administrator account had disabled audit notifications shortly before that discovery. The hallway camera covering the room where my case was later found had been offline. I had immediately requested preservation of access logs before anyone accused me. And state oversight had already removed me from Holloway because of the obvious command conflict. The judge looked at the prosecutor. Has the defendant previously been arrested? No, Your Honor. Any allegation he attempted to flee? No. Any allegation he contacted witnesses? No. The judge released me on an unsecured bond with a condition that I not enter Holloway County Detention Center or contact Silas. I almost laughed at the first condition. Nobody needed to order me back there. By 10:15, I walked out of Redmont with Avery. The sun hurt my eyes. I had been locked up for less than a day. It felt longer. Avery handed me a coffee. You're going to hate what I say next. Probably. Do not call Corinne. I wasn't planning to. Do not text her. I understand. Do not go home if she's there. I have clothes at the office. Good. We drove straight to Blue Frame. My engineering manager, Devin Holt, had been awake most of the night. He met us in the conference room with 3 laptops open. I've got the original alert. Good. And the L-17 controller cache. That surprised me. How? Your field tablet synced diagnostics at 1:24 before you went downstairs. I remembered. Blue Frame service tablets automatically copied recent controller events when a technician opened a device health panel. I had done that after seeing Silas's override. The cache contained only a limited window. It was enough. At 1:18 p.m., Silas's administrator account disabled the door's audit notification function. At 1:21, L-17 opened. At 1:22, it closed. At 1:36, it opened again. The second event belonged to my badge. That was when I went down to inspect it. Who opened it at 1:21? Avery asked. Devin enlarged the record. No badge identifier. That possible? Yes, if the controller receives a remote release command from central control. Who can do that? Command staff. Certain control room officers. Can we identify the workstation? Not from the local cache. That evidence remained inside Holloway's central system. Ortiz had already ordered preservation. Avery asked, what about the maintenance room where Miles's service case was stored? Devin switched screens. Different controller. His field tablet never connected to it. So no cache. Not from us. That meant the state needed Holloway's access records to determine who entered that room while I was with investigators at L-17. I asked, truck camera? Devin smiled. That's better. Blue Frame vans had inward-facing cargo cameras because expensive test equipment and replacement controllers traveled in the back. My service case had been visible when I removed it from the van at 12:42. Devin played the clip. I lifted the black hard-shell case from the cargo rack, set it on the pavement, opened it, and checked the tools. The camera angle showed the interior clearly enough to identify the foam slots. Multimeter. Network tester. Cable tracer. Lock programmer. Spare reader. No prepaid phones. No drug bundles. Avery leaned closer. Can somebody argue the contraband was under the foam? Maybe, Devin said. But the case gets weighed automatically when it returns to the van rack. I looked at him. Seriously? You approved those load sensors last year after 2 scanners disappeared. I had forgotten. He pulled up the vehicle record. At 12:41, before I removed the case, it weighed 18.7 pounds. The arrest inventory listed the case at 22.4. Nearly 4 pounds had appeared between my unloading it and police seizing it. The contraband had weight. Avery sat back. That helps. It doesn't tell us who put it there. No, she said. But it changes what prosecutors have to explain. At noon, Ortiz called. She had obtained an emergency preservation order covering Holloway's access control servers, staff communications, internal camera status logs, segregation records, and command emails. Then she told me something that made me stop taking notes. Deputy Warden Cade was placed on administrative leave this morning. For the L-17 override? For multiple issues. Corinne? Warden Rourke remains in position, but she has been removed from any authority involving this investigation. That was more cautious than what I wanted. It was also how an independent investigation should work. What multiple issues? I can't discuss everything yet. But there is a problem with the camera outage outside the maintenance room. What kind? The camera did not fail. Avery looked at me. Ortiz continued. It was manually disabled from the Security Administration console at 3:52 p.m. That was after I found the first stash. Before contraband appeared in my case. Account? Silas Cade. My hand tightened around the pen. Was he at the console? We are verifying that. Where was I at 3:52? Avery answered before Ortiz could. According to the arrest affidavit, you were with Detective Beckett and Captain Muir in the investigation office. Meaning I could not have disabled the camera covering my own case. Ortiz said, there is another timestamp you should know. I waited. At 4:03, the maintenance room door opened. Whose badge? Warden Corinne Rourke. I stopped breathing for a second. Avery said, are you certain? Yes. I thought back. Corinne had left the investigation office for several minutes while Beckett questioned me about the first stash. I assumed she had gone upstairs. Instead, her badge had opened the room containing my service case. How long was she inside? 2 minutes and 14 seconds. What happened next? At 4:11, Deputy Warden Cade's badge entered the same room. Did Corinne leave before he entered? Yes. Then who found the contraband? Detective Beckett entered at 4:26 with Captain Muir. 23 minutes after my wife. 15 minutes after her lover. Avery asked the obvious question. Has Warden Rourke explained why she went into the room? Ortiz's voice stayed flat. She says Mr. Cade told her he believed blue frame equipment in the case might contain storage media relevant to the controller logs. She went in to make sure nothing was removed before investigators arrived. Did she open the case? She says no. Was it locked? Yes. And Silas? He says he entered for the same reason. I looked at Devin. Can that case be opened without my code? He thought about it. The factory override key can do it. Who has one? Blue frame supervisors. Anyone at Holloway? No. Then he hesitated. What? The detention center has a master key kit for emergency access to contractor equipment lockers. That doesn't open my case. No. But the latch is a common commercial model. If somebody knew the manufacturer, an override key could be ordered. Avery wrote it down. Still no proof. But the timeline had changed again. The contraband did not magically appear in my service case while everyone was watching me. There was a 23-minute window after the maintenance room camera was deliberately disabled. During that window, both Corinne and Silas entered separately. I spent the rest of the afternoon at Blue Frame while Avery handled the criminal case. At 5:40, she returned. The prosecutor is moving to dismiss the charges without prejudice. I stared at her. That fast? Ortiz gave them the truck footage, weight record, and access timeline. They don't believe they can maintain probable cause against you on the current evidence. Without prejudice means they could refile. Yes. Do you think they will? Not unless something changes dramatically. I sat down. For the first time since Beckett cuffed me, I allowed myself to feel relief. Then Avery put another document in front of me. Read this. It was the segregation justification Corinne had signed after booking. The narrative stated that because I serviced Holloway's electronic security systems, I possessed sensitive knowledge about door controls, camera coverage, and restricted movement patterns. Housing me in general population could create coercion risks if inmates attempted to force me to reveal security weaknesses. That argument was not absurd. Then I reached the final paragraph. External transfer is not recommended at this time due to the detainee's potential knowledge of evidence relevant to an active Holloway security investigation and the need to preserve immediate investigative access. I looked at Avery. She wanted me kept inside Holloway because investigators might need access to me? That's what the form says. I had a lawyer. Yes. I could be interviewed from another facility. Yes. And while I stayed there, Silas was still deputy warden. Yes. I read the signature again. Corinne had not merely approved segregation. She had created the reason I should not be transferred out of the institution where both people implicated in the contraband timeline still held command authority. My phone rang. Unknown number. Avery nodded for me to answer on speaker. Hello? Corinne's voice came through. Miles. I said nothing. I know you're out. Yes. I need to explain why my badge is on that maintenance room log. Avery held up one finger, warning me not to interrupt. Corinne continued. Silas told me your case might contain a portable controller image. I went in because I thought you could erase evidence remotely if the case still had a live device. That doesn't make technical sense. I know that now. You have known what my company does for 12 years. I was scared. Of what? She went quiet. Then she said. Of what Silas told me you were going to find if you pulled the full L-17 history. Avery and I looked at each other. What was I going to find? Corinne's breathing became audible. That the contraband had been moving through that corridor for months. Not one pouch. Not one bad afternoon. Months. And my wife had known there was a reason to be afraid of the logs before I ever opened the cabinet. Corinne's call lasted another 4 minutes. Avery recorded none of it. She took notes while I kept the phone on speaker. How long have you known contraband was moving through L-17? I asked. I didn't know it was moving through that door. That isn't what you just said. I knew Silas believed someone was using the service corridor. Someone? He said kitchen deliveries were being manipulated. By inmates? Staff. I looked at Avery. Then why wasn't Blue Frame told? Because Silas said he was working it internally. What does that mean? He had an informant. The answer made me sit back. What kind of informant? One of the laundry workers. An inmate. Name? I'm not discussing an inmate over the phone. Fine. Did internal investigations know? Corinne hesitated. No. Sheriff? No. State oversight? No. So Silas was running an unofficial contraband investigation by himself. He said if he opened a formal case too early, the staff member involved would stop. Did you authorize that? Not in writing. That was an answer. When did he first tell you? About 3 months ago. 3 months. Long before I discovered the affair. What did he show you? Seizure numbers. I frowned. What seizure numbers? Holloway had a serious overdose problem last winter. Fentanyl was getting in faster than we could stop it. Silas reorganized searches and staff screening. Incidents dropped. How much? 40% in 8 weeks. I knew Corinne had been praised for that. The county board had held a press conference. Local news ran a segment about Holloway's security turnaround. Corinne had stood beside the sheriff explaining that tighter staff controls, better intelligence, and targeted searches were saving lives. Silas had been behind her in the footage. What does that have to do with L-17? Silas said part of the reduction came from an inmate source identifying delivery patterns. Officially documented? No. Why not? He said the inmate wouldn't cooperate if his name entered the formal intelligence system. That isn't how a deputy warden gets to run his own private operation. I know. Did you know then? Silence. Corinne. Yes. There was no point raising my voice. You let him do it anyway. Yes. Avery wrote something and turned the pad toward me. Ask what she thought he was actually doing. I did. Corinne answered slowly. I thought he was allowing small amounts of low-level contraband to move long enough to identify the staff route. What counts as low-level? Tobacco. Phones. Maybe Suboxone. Maybe? He wasn't supposed to allow methamphetamine or fentanyl. He wasn't supposed to allow anything. I know that now. You knew it then too. She did not argue. I asked the question that mattered more. Did Silas ever tell you he was personally handling contraband? No. Did you ever see him with it? No. Did you ever suspect he was making money? Not until today. That last answer sounded too clean. Why were you scared of the full L-17 history if you thought he was running an informant operation? Because I knew there would be undocumented door activity. Authorized by you? Some of it. Avery stopped writing. I said, explain. Silas asked me twice to approve after-hours access through the loading corridor without putting the reason in the normal shift briefing. For the informant? That's what he said. So the logs were going to show your authorization too. Yes. There it was. I had spent the night thinking Corinne isolated me because she wanted to protect Silas. She did. But once I opened L-17, the problem had reached her office too. She had allowed a deputy warden, who later became her lover, to bypass formal contraband controls because his results made Holloway look safer. When the results looked good, she accepted the shortcut. When I found a stash inside the same corridor, exposing Silas meant exposing the way she had let him operate. What happened this afternoon? I asked. After I found the pouch. Silas told me the stash might be part of the source operation. 6 phones, methamphetamine and Suboxone hidden inside my controller cabinet? He said someone may have moved it before a controlled recovery. And you believed him? I wanted to. That was the first honest thing she had said without being cornered by a timestamp. What did he tell you about my service case? Her voice broke. He said you were going to pull the controller history and blame both of us. That still doesn't explain why you entered the room. He told me your portable programmer could contain a local copy. It could. I thought if the investigation took the device into evidence first, nobody could accuse me of destroying anything. Did you touch my case? No. Did you open it? No. Did you see Silas put anything inside it? No. Did you know he was going in after you? No. I believed some of that. Not because she deserved the benefit of the doubt. Because the access timeline supported that she entered first and left before Silas arrived. If Corinne had helped physically plant the contraband, there were easier ways than walking into the room under her own badge. Her role was different. She had created the environment that made Silas difficult to challenge. Then she tried to control what happened when the evidence started pointing toward him. Why keep me at Holloway? I asked. She started crying. I thought if you went to another county, the state would get involved immediately. The state should have been involved. I know. You signed a form saying I needed to stay for investigative access. I know. Then you delayed my attorney call. I didn't order anyone to delay your attorney. You took command at 10:52. I approved it as soon as I saw the request. After Silas had held it for almost 2 hours. She went quiet. Did you ask why? No. You took over the jail knowing your husband was in segregation because of a case involving your lover and never asked why he hadn't been allowed to call counsel. I was trying to keep the facility stable. No. You were trying to keep the problem inside your building. She cried harder. I felt nothing useful from hearing it. Avery tapped the table. End the call. I did. By lunchtime, the prosecutor formally dismissed the charges against me. No press conference followed. My record showed an arrest and a dismissal, and Avery immediately began the process of having the arrest record sealed when state law permitted. The important work was happening inside Holloway. Inspector Ortiz's team had taken control of the relevant electronic records. Corinne was placed on administrative leave that afternoon because her admissions created an unavoidable conflict in the contraband investigation. Silas remained off duty. Captain Muir became acting warden. At Blue Frame, Devin gave Ortiz everything the company had on L-17. The full controller history eventually filled in the pattern. Over 11 weeks, L-17 had been remotely opened 23 times outside normal delivery windows. Some openings lasted less than 2 minutes. Others lasted 10 or 15. 16 occurred while Silas was physically inside Holloway. 5 occurred on evenings when the inmate laundry crew was working late. Two happened while Corinne was present in the building after normal administrative hours. The logs could show doors. They could not show motives. Ortiz matched them against staffing and camera records. That produced the first result that changed the case beyond Silas's explanation about an inmate source. 3 officers who appeared repeatedly around the unusual door openings had unexplained deposits into payment apps and bank accounts. Not huge sums. Hundreds at a time. One of them admitted enough to obtain counsel immediately. The contraband had not been flowing through a single inmate informant operation. Staff were involved. Ortiz called Avery that evening and allowed me to listen because the technical records came from Blue Frame. One officer says Cade paid him to leave delivery carts uninspected. For what? He says phones and tobacco at first. Drugs? He denies knowing about methamphetamine. Do you believe him? That's for evidence to decide. What about the inmate source? There was one. That surprised me. Silas didn't invent him? No. The inmate exists and provided information about contraband routes. For a moment, Silas's story sounded almost plausible. Then Ortiz continued. The inmate says Cade began by asking him who was bringing contraband inside. Later Cade started telling him which deliveries not to touch. I understood immediately. He turned the investigation into the route. That is one possibility. What did the inmate get? Protection, housing favors, and commissary privileges. And Silas? We're tracing money. That was enough for now. The shape of it was clear. Silas had begun with a real problem. Contraband was entering Holloway. He developed a source. He learned which staff members could move material through the service corridor. Then somewhere along the way, catching the network became controlling it. That explained why contraband incidents had dropped. Fewer random packages were getting through because one network had become dominant. Silas could point to reduced overdoses and better seizure numbers while deciding which flow continued. Corinne had seen the outcome. She had not looked closely enough at the method because the outcome made her successful. I thought about the county board praising her. The press conference. The statistics. The way she had defended Silas whenever I questioned his access override. Their affair mattered. It made her more willing to trust him. But it was not where the blindness started. She had tied her reputation as Warden to his results before they ever slept together. Avery saw it on my face. You're rethinking her. I'm understanding her better. That help? No. Corinne had not woken up one morning and decided to protect a criminal because she loved him. She had approved undocumented shortcuts because they appeared to work. She accepted success as proof that Silas knew what he was doing. Then she became personally involved with him. By the time evidence threatened the entire arrangement, questioning Silas meant questioning her own judgment, her own statistics and the security program she had publicly claimed as a success. So when I found the pouch, I did not bring her a problem she wanted solved. I brought her proof that the thing she had been defending might never have been what she thought it was. At 8:30 that night, Ortiz called again. This time her tone was different. We executed a warrant on Cade's home. I said nothing. They recovered cash, prepaid phones, and packaging materials consistent with items found at Holloway. That connected Silas physically to the network. Then she added, "There's something else relevant to your arrest." What? One of the officers has admitted putting the contraband in your service case. Avery leaned toward the phone. At whose direction? Silas Cade. I closed my eyes. There was no ambiguity left about the frame-up. Did Corinne know? The officer says he never spoke to her about it. That mattered. My wife had not ordered the drugs planted in my case. She had done something else. When Silas's frame-up worked, she accepted it because it solved the problem in front of her. Then she signed the order that kept me under her roof, behind a locked door, while she tried to keep the rest of the institution from finding out how deep the problem went. My charges disappeared from the court docket by Friday morning. The damage to Blue Frame did not. Holloway County suspended our maintenance contract pending an independent review of every access control component connected to the contraband investigation. Because Blue Frame also serviced 2 county administrative buildings under the same agreement, 31% of our local public sector work stopped with one letter. Devin brought it into my office. They're not accusing us of misconduct. I know. They're still withholding payment on the current service month. How much? He told me. Enough to hurt. Not enough to threaten the company if it stayed temporary. More important were the 6 technicians assigned almost exclusively to Holloway. Keep them on payroll, I said. For how long? 30 days without touching staffing. After that we reassess. Devin sat across from me. The county is asking for full forensic imaging of our Holloway configuration server. That server has data from other clients. I told them. What did they offer? Independent examiner. Segmented export. We approve scope before collection. That was reasonable. Do it. You want Avery to fight the suspension? Not yet. He looked surprised. I thought you'd want Blue Frame out of Holloway forever. Emotionally, yes. And professionally? Professionally, our system is evidence in a jail smuggling case. If we walk away while they're trying to validate it, Silas gets to say the vendor refused scrutiny. Devin nodded. So we cooperate. We cooperate with Ortiz and the independent examiner. Nobody gives Holloway command staff direct access to raw client data. Got it. That became the one business consequence I could not simply ignore. I had employees depending on a contract now frozen because the institution my wife ran had used our equipment as part of a criminal route and then used my own service case to frame me. I could either react personally or protect the company. For the first time all week, those were clearly different decisions. Inspector Ortiz spent the next several days moving backward through Holloway's contraband program. What she found made Silas harder to dismiss as a simple criminal who had fooled everyone from the beginning. His program had once worked. 14 months earlier, Holloway had experienced 5 opioid overdoses in 6 weeks. 2 inmates nearly died. The sheriff demanded changes, and Corinne put Silas in charge of a special interdiction effort. He tightened employee screening, changed contractor delivery procedures, expanded random searches. Most importantly, he cultivated an inmate source in the laundry unit who identified a kitchen contractor bringing pills and tobacco through service deliveries. That investigation led to 2 arrests. A second staff member resigned before charges were filed. Overdose calls declined. Phone seizures dropped. The county praised the program. Corinne received a commendation from the board. Silas became deputy warden 4 months later. I understood the trap immediately. If his first shortcuts had produced nothing but disaster, Corinne would have stopped him. Instead they produced results. Ortiz came to Blue Frame because she needed help interpreting the old L-17 activity against facility records. I stayed in the conference room only because Avery was present and the county had formally removed me from any suspect status. Ortiz placed a spreadsheet on the screen. These are the unusual remote releases. 23 events. Beside them were delivery schedules, staffing logs and incident reports. The first 6 lined up with documented investigations. A suspected contractor entered. Silas's inmate source moved into the service area. Officers later searched specific carts and recovered contraband. Nothing about those first events suggested Silas was personally importing drugs. Then the pattern changed. The 7th remote opening produced no seizure report. Neither did the 8th. Or 9th. What happened here? Ortiz asked. I checked the controller notes. Same command method. Could the system distinguish whether Silas initiated them? Not from the door controller alone. Central control should. We have those records. She moved to another column. Silas authorized 5 of the 7. 2 used Curran's executive override. I stared at her name. Why would she remotely release a service door? That's one of the questions she answered in her administrative interview. What did she say? That Silas called her twice when his source operation needed access and he was away from the control console. She approved the releases. Did she know what was moving through? She says she believed the source was tracking tobacco and phones. That matched what Corinne had told me. Ortiz moved farther down the timeline. 2 months after the first undocumented release, Holloway's medical unit treated an inmate for suspected fentanyl exposure. No death. Naloxone worked. The incident report said the source of the drug was unknown. 3 days later, Captain Muir sent Corinne a memorandum recommending that the State Detention Oversight Office review employee entry controls because internal searches had not identified where opioids were entering. I read the recommendation. Then Ortiz showed me Corinne's response. Hold external referral pending completion of CADE intelligence operation. Expanding access now may compromise source and staff identification. Review in 30 days. 30 days later, no referral was made. Instead, Silas submitted a report showing contraband seizures had declined another 22%. Corinne signed the report and sent it to the county board. I looked at Ortiz. Was the decline real? The number of documented seizures declined. That isn't what I asked. We found something else. She placed Holloway medical records beside the security statistics. Overdose incidents had not declined at the same rate. Neither had positive drug tests. Some months were worse. The jail was reporting fewer intercepted packages while still seeing evidence that drugs were reaching inmates. That should have raised questions. It did. Ortiz showed me an email from a state compliance analyst sent 6 months earlier. The analyst had noticed the mismatch and asked whether Holloway wanted technical assistance reviewing staff entry controls and delivery corridors. Corinne forwarded the email to Silas. Her message contained only one sentence. "Can your source resolve this before I invite the state into our building?" Silas replied. "Give me 60 days. She did. The state never came. I sat back. The affair had not started yet, according to Corinne's own timeline. That mattered. She had been protecting Silas's method before she was sleeping with him. The personal betrayal made everything uglier later, but it had not created the original failure. What happened after 60 days? I asked. Ortiz answered. Silas reported another decline in contraband seizures and said his source had identified 2 staff vulnerabilities that were being addressed internally. Did he identify the staff members? Not by name. And Corinne accepted that? Yes. Avery asked, did she know the statistical picture was misleading? Ortiz chose her words carefully. She knew the state had questioned why seizure numbers were improving while medical indicators remained inconsistent. She chose to rely on Cade's explanation and did not request outside review. That was enough. I remembered county board meetings Corinne had attended in uniform. She would come home exhausted but proud. She talked about fewer drugs, fewer phones, better intelligence. She told me Holloway had finally stopped reacting and started controlling the problem. At the time, I was proud of her too. That made the truth more uncomfortable. Her reputation had become attached to Silas before her marriage did. Once his program was publicly described as a success, challenging it carried a cost for her. She would have to tell the county that the numbers she had celebrated might not mean what she said they meant. She would have to invite state investigators into a system she had repeatedly described as under control. She would have to admit the deputy she promoted was operating beyond documented authority. So she kept giving him more time. A month became 2. Then 6. By the time they slept together, professional dependence had already become personal loyalty. By the time I found the pouch behind the blue frame cabinet, Corinne was not deciding whether to investigate one suspicious bag. She was deciding whether to admit that the security program she had defended for nearly a year might itself be helping Contraband move. Ortiz gathered her papers. There is one more reason I came today. What? We reviewed the monthly reports Corinne submitted to the county. I braced for another falsified document. Instead, Ortiz said, the raw figures are accurate. I looked at her. She didn't fake the statistics. No. That was important. She reported fewer seizures because there were fewer documented seizures. The problem was interpretation. She presented those numbers publicly as evidence the interdiction strategy was reducing contraband even after she knew medical indicators did not support that conclusion cleanly. Avery nodded. She believed the numbers she wanted to believe. Ortiz did not adopt the phrase. She had enough contrary information that outside review was warranted. That was more precise. And worse for Corinne. She had not needed to forge anything. She simply kept choosing the explanation that allowed Silas's program, and her success, to remain intact. The criminal investigation into him moved faster. The officer who admitted planting drugs in my service case identified 2 other employees who had carried contraband through the loading corridor. Financial records showed Silas receiving payments routed through accounts connected to relatives of inmates. Ortiz's office believed the operation had shifted from controlled intelligence work into active smuggling about 7 months earlier. Corinne's administrative actions did not prove she knew about the money. So far, investigators had found no payment to her and no evidence that she shared Silas's profits. Her problem was becoming something more specific. She had created room for him to operate. She had rejected outside scrutiny when warning signs appeared. And after I exposed the physical stash, she used her authority against the person forcing that scrutiny to happen. That evening, Avery called me from her car. Ortiz found something from the night you were booked. I stopped outside Blueframe's loading dock. What? Holloway activated its critical incident communications bridge after the first contraband pouch was found. I knew the system. Major disturbances, escapes, deaths and large contraband seizures triggered a temporary command channel connecting central control, senior staff and outside responders. For review purposes, the bridge was recorded. Was Corinne on it? Yes. Silas? Yes. Avery paused. They had a private exchange on the bridge after your booking but before Corinne signed the segregation order. How private can it be if the system records it? Apparently they forgot the bridge stayed live when the main group disconnected. I felt my stomach tighten. What did they say? Ortiz hasn't released the audio to us yet. She wants prosecutors to hear the original first. Does she know what's on it? Yes. And? Avery's voice dropped. She told me the call changes Corinne's case. I looked across the equipment yard as a forklift moved between rows of generators. What kind of change? From administrative failure to possible obstruction. For 3 days, I had been trying to understand why my wife signed the order that kept me in her jail. The answer was sitting on a recorded command line from the same night. And unlike the explanations Corinne had given me afterward, this one had been spoken while she still believed I was locked away and nobody outside Holloway was listening. Avery did not let me hear the command bridge recording that night. Ortiz asked us to wait until prosecutors preserve the original and confirm the timestamps. I already know Corinne is on it. You know what Ortiz told me. And you know more. Avery looked at me across the conference room table. Yes. Enough to tell me whether Corinne knew Silas planted the contraband? No. That answer mattered. Then what changes her case? She talks about you. I stopped asking. If the recording was important enough to move Corinne from an administrative investigation toward possible criminal obstruction, I wanted the original chain established before I heard a copy. The next morning, the county prosecutor recused his office. Corinne was a county department head. Holloway worked with local prosecutors constantly on inmate cases, warrants, assaults and contraband charges. Silas had testified for that office more times than anyone could quickly count. The Attorney General assigned a special prosecutor from another circuit. By noon, Ortiz's team had delivered the command recording, access logs, segregation paperwork, attorney call history and Corinne's administrative interviews. At 2:40, Avery called. They've cleared the recording for disclosure to us because you're discussed directly. I drove to her office. The audio began at 8:37 p.m., roughly 2 hours after my arrest. The main incident call involved Captain Muir, Detective Beckett, Central Control, Corinne and Silas. They discussed the pouch found behind the blue frame cabinet, the contraband recovered from my service case and preserving both areas for evidence. Nothing in the first 12 minutes surprised me. Then Beckett disconnected. Muir left the bridge. Central Control signed off. The system remained open because Silas had created the incident channel under an emergency template requiring a supervisor to manually terminate recording. He apparently forgot. For 18 seconds there was only background noise. Then Corinne spoke. You said his case was clean. Silas answered, it is now. I felt my hands go cold. Corinne said, what does that mean? Exactly what it sounds like. A chair scraped. Then her voice sharpened. Silas. He came in here already convinced I was dirty. He found the cabinet. He was going to pull every access event before we had time to clean up the source operation. You put that stuff in Miles's case? Silence. Then. I solved the immediate problem. Corinne swore. Not softly. You planted narcotics on my husband inside my jail? He's not your husband tonight. He's the contractor who just blew open an operation you authorized. Do not do that. I'm telling you what happens if he walks. He calls Blue Frame, they preserve everything, state oversight gets the controller records, and suddenly every undocumented release you approved becomes part of the same file. Corinne's breathing was audible. He already called his lawyer. Then keep him here. Avery stopped the recording. I stared at her. Play the rest. She did. Corinne said, I can't hold him without a court order. You don't need to. Beckett arrested him. House him here until first appearance. He needs to be transferred. Why? Because I am the warden. And that's exactly why you can justify protective segregation. He knows the security system. Every inmate on this unit would want access to him. That's not why you want him isolated. No. It's why you can document it. I closed my eyes. There was no misunderstanding left about Silas. He had framed me and then told Corinne what he had done. The only remaining question was what she did after hearing it. The answer came seconds later. Corinne said, "If Beckett learns you planted those drugs, you're finished. Then don't tell Beckett tonight." A long pause. How long? Until morning. Let me fix the controller problem and talk to the officer who moved the package. Then we decide what gets reported. You're asking me to conceal evidence. I'm asking you not to blow up the whole facility at 10 o'clock at night because your husband got caught in the middle. He didn't get caught in the middle. You put him there. Silas did not answer. Corinne spoke again. I am not destroying logs. I didn't ask you to. I am not touching Blueframe's server. Fine. And I am not ordering anyone to question Miles without counsel. Fine. Another pause. Then Silas said, "Keep him in segregation. No general phones. No movement. Attorney contact through command review. By morning I'll know what the state can actually see." Corinne's answer came so quietly I almost missed it. Until morning. The recording continued for another minute. Silas asked whether she would sign the housing order personally. She said yes. He reminded her that if I transferred to Redmont, outside intake staff would immediately see the conflict and contact state oversight. Corinne answered. Then he stays here. Avery stopped the audio. For several seconds neither of us spoke. I had spent days separating what Corinne did from what Silas did. Now that distinction was painfully clear. Silas planted the contraband. Corinne learned about it after my arrest. She did not help him put drugs in my case. She did not order the frame-up. But once he confessed to her, she chose not to report it. Then she signed the order keeping me isolated inside the facility they controlled while Silas tried to find out how much evidence existed outside Holloway. Avery closed the laptop. That is why Ortiz said obstruction. I looked at the black screen. She knew before she signed segregation. Yes. She knew I was innocent of the contraband in my case. She knew Silas said he planted it. And she still kept me there. Yes. The humiliation of the cell changed in my memory. Until that moment, part of me had wondered whether Corinne still believed the evidence against me when she signed my isolation order. She had not. She knew the evidence was fabricated. The solitary cell was not a safety decision based on uncertainty. It was time purchased with me inside it. Avery said, "The special prosecutor wants your testimony about the attorney call and housing conditions. Nothing more today. When are they arresting Silas? They are not telling us operational details." Corinne? Same answer. I stood. I need air. Outside, Richmond had one of those gray afternoons where the sky looked lower than the buildings. I walked half a block before Avery caught up. "Do not call her." "I know. Do not go to the house." "I know. She may contact you." "I won't answer." That promise lasted 43 minutes. Corinne called from Rebecca. "No, wrong story. Need current wife's counsel not named yet. We haven't named her lawyer. Let's avoid lawyer naming." She called from her personal phone. I watched it ring. Then a voicemail appeared. I played it with Avery standing beside me. "Miles, Ortiz played me the command recording." Corinne sounded exhausted. "I know you'll hear it too. I'm not going to tell you I misunderstood Silas. I didn't. I knew what he was saying." She paused. "I should have called Beckett the second Silas admitted he planted the contraband. I didn't because I knew the next questions would be about the door overrides, the undocumented source operation and the reports I had defended for months." Her breathing broke. "I told myself one night would let me separate what Silas had done from the program I had authorized." Then came the sentence I had needed her to say without prompting. "I knew you were innocent when I signed the segregation order." Avery looked at me. Corinne continued. "I knew keeping you at Holloway helped Silas. I also knew it helped me postpone the moment when I had to admit what I had allowed inside that jail." The message ended without asking me to call back. I saved it and forwarded it to Avery. By 5, the special prosecutor had it too. The next day, Silas was arrested at his sister's house outside Chesterfield. The charges included conspiracy to introduce contraband into a detention facility, drug distribution, bribery involving corrections employees, evidence tampering and framing me with contraband. 3 Holloway employees were charged with him. The state seized financial records tied to the payments investigators had already traced. Corinne was not arrested that morning. Instead, she was ordered to surrender her county credentials and remain on administrative leave while prosecutors completed their review of the command recording and segregation decision. The county board met in emergency session that afternoon. They terminated her as warden. No severance. No ceremonial resignation. Her authority over Holloway ended with a vote she was not permitted to influence. I watched the announcement from Blue Frame with Devin. He turned off the television after the board chair finished. "You okay?" "No." "Want me to go?" "No." He stayed anyway. An hour later, the county notified us that Blue Frame's contract suspension would continue only until the independent examiner completed system validation. The preliminary findings cleared our hardware and software of causing the contraband control failures. That was all I needed from the business side. The company could recover. My marriage could not. I moved my personal accounts, changed the emergency contact on Blue Frame's corporate records and asked Avery for a referral to a divorce attorney. I did not wait to see whether Corinne would be criminally charged. The recording had already answered the question that mattered between us. She knew I had been framed. She knew the man she was protecting had planted drugs in my property. And instead of opening my cell, she signed the paper that kept the door closed. 2 evenings later, the special prosecutor called Avery. Corinne had requested a meeting with investigators. Not to negotiate dismissal. Not yet. She wanted to give a complete statement about the contraband program, Silas's access, the undocumented releases and the night I was arrested. Avery asked whether I wanted to know more. Only if it changes what she did to me. It probably won't. Then I don't need it. The essential truth was finally complete. Silas had transformed a legitimate contraband investigation into a smuggling network. Corinne had allowed his unofficial methods to continue because the results strengthened her reputation and because she trusted him long after the warning signs justified outside review. Their affair deepened that loyalty, but it did not create the original failure. When I exposed the stash, Silas framed me. When Corinne learned he had done it, she chose to protect the system she had built around him rather than free the husband she knew was innocent. Everything after that would determine the legal consequences. It would not change the choice. Corinne gave her complete statement the following Monday. I was not there. I did not need to be. By then, the recorded command call had already established the part of the night that concerned me. Anything else she told prosecutors could explain Holloway, Silas, the contraband program, or her own decisions, but it could not change the fact that she knew I had been framed before she signed the order keeping me in segregation. Avery called after the interview ended. She admitted the recording is accurate. I expected that. She also admitted she deliberately withheld Silas's confession from Detective Beckett until the next morning. Did she ever tell Beckett herself? No. Ortiz arrived before she did. That fit the timeline. If Avery had not called Ortiz after my 5-minute legal call, Corinne might have reached morning with the problem still inside Holloway. Instead, state oversight walked through the door before she could decide how to present it. What happens now? I asked. The special prosecutor decides charges. How much of Silas's operation did she admit knowing? Enough that she looks negligent and compromised. Not enough to put her inside the smuggling conspiracy before your arrest. That distinction still mattered. Corinne had authorized undocumented access. She had suppressed outside scrutiny. She had trusted numbers she should have questioned. She had slept with the deputy running the program. But investigators had not found evidence that she received smuggling money, ordered contraband brought inside, or knew Silas had turned his source operation into a business before I found the pouch. Her criminal exposure began when Silas told her exactly what he had done to me. Then she chose what to do with that knowledge. Avery said, the prosecutor is focusing on the command call, the segregation order, the delayed attorney access, and her failure to disclose the frame-up. That's enough. Yes. I was glad somebody else said it. 3 days later, Corinne was indicted. The charges were narrower than television commentators had predicted and more serious than her attorneys had hoped. The indictment alleged that after learning Silas had planted drugs in my service case, Corinne knowingly obstructed the investigation by withholding that information, agreed to delay outside disclosure, and used her authority as warden to keep me isolated inside Holloway while Silas tried to determine what electronic evidence existed. There was also a separate official misconduct count tied to the segregation order. Silas faced a much larger case involving trafficking, bribery, tampering, conspiracy, and the frame-up. Their cases were connected by one night. They were not treated as the same crime. That afternoon Corinne's lawyer called my divorce attorney. Not me. Corinne would not contest the divorce. She would agree to temporary financial arrangements immediately and work toward a final settlement without asking me to delay until the criminal case ended. My attorney asked whether I wanted to take advantage of that and push for a quick agreement. Yes. You don't want to wait to see whether she's convicted? No. The criminal case could affect some financial issues. Handle whatever you need to handle. I'm not keeping the marriage alive for litigation strategy. He understood. I filed that week. Corinne did not call. For nearly a month, I heard nothing directly from her. That silence helped more than I expected. Blueframe's independent review finished during the same period. The examiner found that our access control software had recorded the unusual door activity correctly and that the audit notification suppression came from Holloway administrator credentials rather than a technical failure. The county restored our contract under temporary outside monitoring. Devin brought the reinstatement letter into my office. We're back Monday. Good. The 6 technicians? Put them back on their regular rotations. He nodded. Then he looked at me. You going back into Holloway? No. You're the owner. That's why I can decide not to. He smiled. I'll take it. The suspended payments arrived the following week. That closed the part of the incident that threatened my employees. I did not need Holloway to become the center of Blueframe's future just because it had nearly destroyed mine. The criminal case against Silas moved first. One of the corrections officers agreed to testify against him, and the financial records were difficult to explain away. His attorney eventually negotiated a plea covering contraband trafficking, bribery, evidence tampering, and the act of planting drugs in my service case. He admitted the frame-up in open court. The statement was short. After I discovered the pouch behind the blue frame cabinet, Silas believed the access logs would expose the undocumented corridor activity. He directed an officer to place contraband inside my equipment case so investigators would treat me as part of the network rather than the person who discovered it. That was what he had done. Nothing in his plea suggested Corinne knew beforehand. When he confessed to her later, she became responsible for what happened next. I read the factual summary once and put it away. Silas would be sentenced later. I had no interest in attending. Corinne's lawyers took longer to decide what to do. Her strongest defense was not that the command recording was false. It was that keeping me in protective segregation could have had legitimate security reasons even after Silas confessed. I knew too much about the jail's electronic systems. General population would have created real safety concerns. A transfer might have taken time. Her lawyers could argue that the housing decision was reasonable even if her failure to report Silas immediately was not. That argument bothered me because parts of it were true. Then Avery called one Tuesday morning. Corinne has a plea offer. I waited. The prosecutor will drop the official misconduct count if she pleads guilty to felony obstruction and admits the segregation decision was used, at least in part, to delay outside scrutiny after she knew the evidence against you had been planted. What's the sentencing range? Her attorney can argue for home confinement or a short jail sentence. The prosecutor is asking for incarceration. Is prison guaranteed? No. That was the honest answer. A guilty plea did not automatically produce the ending implied by every headline. A judge would consider her lack of record, cooperation, career, the length of my detention, the absence of physical injury, and the fact that she did not participate in Silas's trafficking operation. The judge would also hear that she knowingly left an innocent man in segregation after learning a subordinate had framed him. What is Corinne doing? She hasn't accepted yet. I went back to work. 2 days later, she asked to speak with me. My divorce attorney recommended we meet in his office with counsel present. Corinne arrived carrying no folder. She looked different without the Holloway uniform. Not weaker. Smaller somehow, as though a large part of how I had seen her had always been built from keys, radios, staff following her through doors, and the certainty that when Corinne Rourke entered a room, somebody would listen. We sat across from each other. She said, "My lawyer thinks I have a viable defense to part of the case." I heard. He thinks the segregation classification itself can be justified. It probably can. That surprised her. You agree? You had a real reason not to put someone who knows the door system in general population. Yes. That is not why you kept me at Holloway. Her eyes lowered. No. And it isn't why you let Silas control my attorney access for 2 hours. No. She folded her hands. If I go to trial, that's where the defense has to live. What do you mean? We would separate every decision. She started counting them quietly. Beckett made the arrest. Intake processed you. Protective segregation had an independent safety rationale. Command review existed before your arrest. Ortiz transferred you within hours. No one questioned you illegally. No evidence was destroyed. All true. And if each piece is viewed alone, my lawyer thinks there's enough room for reasonable doubt about whether I was obstructing anything. I leaned back. Except the call. Yes. Silas telling her to keep me there. Corinne answering, until morning. The recording connected decisions that could otherwise be presented as unrelated. She continued. My attorney would argue that I was buying time to stabilize the facility, not to protect Silas. Do you believe that? Her eyes met mine. Partly. That was more honest than saying no. Holloway had a major contraband breach. Staff were implicated. My husband had been arrested. My deputy had just told me he planted drugs on you. I was terrified that if I called every outside agency at once, the jail would lose command entirely. You could have called Beckett. Yes. You could have told him his arrest evidence was fake. Yes. You could have transferred me. Yes. Corinne wiped her eyes. I kept thinking I could hold everything still until morning. I remembered the cell. The concrete bunk. The paper cup of water. Waiting 3 hours to speak to Avery. You held me still. Her face collapsed. Yes. There was no speech after that. She did not tell me about Silas's addiction to power, the pressure of running Holloway, her statistics, or how much she had loved her career. All of those things had already been explained. She said, I'm taking the plea. I waited. My lawyer told me not to decide until after our meeting. Then why meet? Because if I took it without seeing you, part of me would still pretend I was pleading because the recording made trial too dangerous. And? I'm pleading because it's true. That was the first useful thing she had given me since before the arrest. Not because it helped me legally. Because it did not ask me to carry part of her responsibility. She signed the plea agreement the following morning. At the hearing, Corinne admitted under oath that she knew Silas had framed me before she approved continued segregation, that she intentionally failed to report his confession immediately, and that keeping me at Holloway reduced the chance outside authorities would intervene before she and Silas understood the electronic evidence. She did not claim the segregation order had no legitimate security basis. She admitted she used a legitimate administrative tool for an illegitimate additional purpose. The judge accepted the plea. Sentencing was set for 6 weeks later. That same afternoon, the county board released the last of Holloway's internal review. Captain Muir remained acting warden. Several staff members were terminated. The state assumed temporary oversight of contraband controls. I skimmed one page and stopped. Holloway was someone else's institution now. Corinne came out of court and walked past reporters without speaking. For years she had controlled who entered locked rooms, who left them, and under what authority. Now she had admitted using that authority against a man she knew was innocent. The only unresolved question was whether the judge would decide losing her career was punishment enough. I already knew my answer. It had not been enough when I was the one behind the door. Corinne's sentencing took place 6 weeks after her plea. I spent most of those 6 weeks working. Blue Frame had its Holloway contract back, but I stayed away from the facility. Devin handled the county meetings, and another supervisor took responsibility for every service visit inside the detention center. The arrangement cost me nothing except pride. I had enough of that to spare. The divorce moved quietly at the same time. Corinne did not contest the filing, and our attorneys had already agreed on temporary possession of the house, accounts and vehicles. She remained at her sister's place while awaiting sentencing. We did not speak. The only direct contact came 3 days before court, when she sent a message through my attorney asking whether I intended to make a victim statement. I answered yes. She did not ask what I planned to say. Silas had been sentenced the previous week. His plea covered the trafficking operation, bribery and the decision to plant drugs in my service case. The judge gave him a lengthy state prison sentence that would keep him incarcerated well beyond the minimum term Corinne faced. I read the number in Avery's email and moved on. Silas had built the trap. Corinne's sentencing was about what happened after she knew it was a trap. The courtroom was full when I arrived. Former Holloway employees occupied one row. County officials sat farther back. Reporters filled nearly every remaining seat. Corinne entered through the public door with her attorney. No uniform. No badge. No keys clipped to her belt. She wore a charcoal suit and carried nothing. Our eyes met for less than a second. Then she sat at the defense table. The prosecutor asked for a prison sentence. He did not spend much time on the larger contraband scandal. Corinne had not pleaded guilty to trafficking. There was no evidence she took money from Silas or helped create the smuggling network. Instead, he focused on the hours after Silas admitted framing me. Corinne knew the evidence inside my service case had been planted. She knew the arresting detective did not know that. She knew I was being held inside a jail where Silas remained deputy warden. And she signed the segregation order anyway. The prosecutor put one page from the command bridge transcript on the screen. He did not play the whole recording. Only the exchange that mattered. Silas. Keep him in segregation. No general phones. No movement. Attorney contact through command review. By morning I'll know what the state can actually see. Corinne. Until morning. The screen went dark. The prosecutor faced the judge. Those two words are why this is not simply a management failure. Corinne's attorney stood next. He did not deny the words. He argued that she had spent 23 years in corrections without a disciplinary finding, that she had cooperated fully once state oversight took control, and that she had accepted a felony conviction knowing it would effectively end her career. He also emphasized that my confinement lasted hours, not days. No one assaulted me. No interrogation occurred after I requested counsel. No evidence disappeared. And when Inspector Ortiz arrived, Corinne did not physically prevent my transfer. Her attorney asked for home confinement, probation, and community service. Then the judge asked him something simple. When did the defendant learn Mr. Rourke was innocent of the contraband found in his service case? Before the segregation order, Your Honor. And did the arresting detective know? No. Did the defendant tell him? No. The judge nodded. That is the difficulty. My turn came next. Avery walked with me to the lectern, then stepped back. I had written 4 pages. I used one. I was inside Holloway because drugs had been found in my equipment case. When my wife signed the segregation order, she already knew those drugs had been planted. I looked toward Corinne. She kept her eyes on me. I spent that night thinking I was locked away because she believed I might be guilty. Later I learned she knew I wasn't. Nobody in the courtroom moved. I'm not asking the court to punish her for Silas Cade's trafficking operation. I'm not asking the court to punish her for our marriage or her affair. I paused. I'm asking the court to consider what it means when the person running a jail knows a detainee has been framed and still uses that jail to keep him isolated because his freedom would create problems for her. That was all. I returned to my seat. Corinne stood last. Her attorney had prepared a statement for her. I saw the pages on the table. She did not pick them up. Your Honor, I knew Miles was innocent when I signed the order. The judge watched her. Corinne continued. I also knew Deputy Warden Cade had committed a crime by planting contraband on him. I should have reported that immediately and removed myself from every decision involving Miles. She stopped. Her attorney did not prompt her. I didn't. That was as close as she came to explaining herself. No discussion of Holloway's overdose crisis. No statistics. No claim that she needed to stabilize the facility. I used the authority of my office to postpone a consequence I was afraid to face. She looked toward me once. I have no excuse for that. Then she sat down. The judge recessed for 20 minutes. When everyone returned, he spent most of his remarks distinguishing Corinne from Silas. Silas had corrupted a legitimate intelligence operation into a smuggling network and deliberately manufactured evidence against me. Corinne had not done those things. Her offense began later. That did not make it minor. The judge said wardens held unusual power because people inside their facilities could not simply walk away when authority was abused. A private employer could fire someone. A spouse could leave an argument. A warden could close a steel door. That power required more restraint, not less. He looked at Corinne. You learned that an innocent detainee had been framed by your own deputy. At that moment, Your duty was not complicated. Corinne lowered her eyes. You had to disclose the frame-up and remove yourself. The judge continued. Instead, you approved continued isolation and delayed outside scrutiny because disclosure would expose failures in a program you had authorized and in a subordinate with whom you had an undisclosed personal relationship. Then he imposed sentence. 2 years in state custody. 18 months to be served. The remaining 6 months suspended, followed by supervised probation. Corinne's attorney had asked for home confinement. The judge denied it. He said the loss of her career was significant but could not substitute entirely for incarceration when the crime itself involved knowingly misusing custodial authority. Corinne closed her eyes. Her sister began crying behind her. I felt no satisfaction. Only a strange stillness. The sentence was shorter than Silas's because what Corinne had done was different. It was long enough that nobody could call the felony symbolic. The judge finished the conditions of probation. No employment in corrections during the supervision period. Compliance with any state ethics restrictions. Restitution limited to costs established separately. Then he asked whether the defense wanted Corinne allowed to self-surrender at a later date. The prosecutor objected. The judge denied the request. Corinne was remanded immediately. A court deputy approached the defense table. Her attorney whispered something to her. She nodded. Then she removed her watch. For a moment, I thought of all the watches, badges, phones and keys that had moved through this case. She handed the watch to her sister. The deputy asked Corinne to place her hands behind her back. She did. The cuffs closed. No struggle. No speech. No last attempt to catch my eye. The deputy led her toward the side door. I remembered Holloway. The concrete bunk. The food slot. The fluorescent light that never fully went off. The first 5-minute phone call Avery finally got approved. I had used that call to tell her one thing. Get Inspector Lena Ortiz into the records before Holloway could decide what survived. At 2:17 the next morning, Ortiz walked into the segregation corridor. That call did not convict Corinne. It did not manufacture the command recording, the access logs or the segregation order. It simply moved the truth outside the institution she controlled before she and Silas could decide how to present it. Everything that followed came from records they had created themselves. The steel side door closed behind Corinne. For years, she had decided who entered locked housing and when they came out. That afternoon, somebody else decided for her. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited behind barriers. Avery and I used the main steps because I was tired of side doors. Someone shouted, "Mr. Rourke, is this justice?" I kept walking. Another reporter asked whether I planned to visit Corinne. I did not answer that either. Avery waited until we reached her car. "You okay?" "I think so. You want to go home?" "Not yet." I drove to Blue Frame instead. Devin was in the service bay helping a technician bench test a replacement controller. He looked at me and immediately understood the hearing was over. What did she get? 18 months to serve. He put down the screwdriver. "That's prison?" "Yes." Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then he asked, "What now?" I looked around the shop. Controllers on shelves. Tool cases open on workbenches. Technicians arguing about a firmware problem near the loading door. Normal work. Now we finished the county upgrade. Devin nodded. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing exactly that. At 6, my divorce attorney emailed the final settlement draft. Corinne had signed it before sentencing. The house would be sold. Our retirement accounts would be divided according to the agreement. Neither of us would seek support. My business remained mine. Her pension rights remained hers to the extent the law allowed after the felony conviction. There was one handwritten note attached to the scanned signature page. Not to the court. Not to Avery. To me. "I won't make you wait until I get out." I read it once. Then I signed my side. By the time Corinne arrived at the state intake facility that evening, our marriage had only paperwork left between it and the end. Her criminal case was over. Silas's network had been exposed. Holloway belonged to new leadership. The part nobody else could decide was whether I would ever want to hear Corinne's voice again when the prison doors eventually opened. I already suspected the answer. The divorce became final 12 days after Corinne entered state custody. I signed the last acknowledgement in my attorney's office, carried a certified copy back to my truck, and sat behind the wheel for several minutes without starting the engine. 23 years of Curran's career had ended in a courtroom. 14 years of our marriage ended with a stamped sheet of paper. Neither felt as loud as I expected. The house sold soon afterward. I kept very little from it. My tools. A walnut desk my father built. 2 boxes of photographs. The coffee grinder Curran had hated because it was too loud at 5 in the morning. Everything else became furniture, proceeds, or something neither of us cared enough about to argue over. Before the closing, I walked through the empty house one last time. The guest room was where I had slept after discovering the affair. The kitchen was where Curran had told me Silas was complicated, and asked for time before we decided whether our marriage could survive him. I had thought the affair would be the thing that ended us. It wasn't. Infidelity damaged trust. Knowing your wife left you in a locked cell after learning you had been framed destroyed something more basic. It changed what you believed she was capable of doing when your welfare stood between her and a consequence she feared. There was nothing left to rebuild after that. Blue Frame returned to normal faster than I did. The county contract remained under outside monitoring for several months, but the technicians stopped treating Holloway like contaminated ground. They went in, serviced controllers, documented everything, and came home. Devin kept the Holloway account away from my desk unless something required ownership approval. Most weeks, nothing did. That was exactly how I wanted it. Curran sent me one letter from prison. It arrived 3 months into her sentence. The return address looked strange above her name. I left it unopened on my desk for 2 days. Then I read it. She wrote that prison was teaching her things corrections management never had. As warden, she had spent years seeing housing charts, incident reports, movement schedules and disciplinary decisions as systems that needed to function. As an inmate, every locked door belonged to a person waiting for someone else to open it. She did not claim the experience made her understand everything she had done to me. She wrote that she finally understood why calling my segregation temporary had been such a dishonest comfort. Temporary to the person holding the key was not the same thing as temporary to the person behind the door. The letter contained no request for forgiveness. At the bottom she wrote, "I used to believe I could correct any bad decision if I kept control long enough. The night you were arrested, losing control was the one thing I feared most. I made you pay for that fear." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish her. There was simply nothing I needed to add. Several months later, Holloway invited Blue Frame to bid on a larger security modernization package. Devin brought the notice into my office. "You want this?" I looked through the scope. Door controllers. Camera integration. Audit retention. Automated alerts when a detainee's legal access request exceeded defined time limits. That last requirement held my attention for a second. Then I signed the authorization to bid. "You're sure?" "Yes. You won't have to go on site." "I know." He picked up the folder. At the door, he stopped. "You ever think about that first call?" "Which one?" "The one from segregation." Of course I did. 5 minutes on a jail phone. A corrections officer watching the clock. Avery answering before the second ring. I had been frightened, furious, and more humiliated than I knew how to admit. But I had still known the most important thing to do. Get the records outside Curran's control. That call reached Ortiz. Ortiz walked into Holloway before sunrise. Once that happened, nobody inside the jail could quietly decide which logs mattered, which timestamps disappeared into routine retention, or which version of my arrest became official. "I think about it sometimes," I said. Devin nodded and left. That evening, I drove past Holloway on the interstate. The facility sat beyond a line of trees, mostly invisible except for the upper lights and one section of perimeter fencing. For years I had known the place through Curran. Her promotions. Her complaints. Her pride when overdose numbers fell. Her belief that she and Silas had finally brought the institution under control. Then I knew it from the inside. Concrete bunk. Steel door. Property bag. A phone call I had to wait 3 hours to make. I took the next exit and kept driving. Curran would eventually be released. Silas would remain in prison much longer. Holloway would keep operating. Blue Frame would keep maintaining doors that were supposed to open only for the right people, for the right reasons, with every decision recorded somewhere no single person could erase. My own life became quieter. I moved into a smaller house near the equipment yard. I started sleeping through the night again. I stopped checking my phone whenever an unknown number appeared. One afternoon, while cleaning out the console of my truck, I found the property receipt from Holloway. It listed everything they had taken from me at booking: wallet, keys, phone, belt, shoes. At the bottom was the classification code that sent me to segregation. I read Curran's signature one last time. Then I tore the receipt in half and dropped it into the trash at a gas station. For months, I had carried proof that my wife once had the power to lock me away. I did not need it anymore. The records that mattered were preserved. The court had heard them. The doors had closed on the people responsible. And the only call I still remembered clearly was the one I made from behind that steel door, the call that put the truth somewhere my wife could no longer keep it locked up with me. That's all for today. Remember to subscribe and support us.